There are stories in the Bible where heaven shouts, and others where it simply waits. This is a tale where the greatest victory came not from sword or spear, but from footsteps in silence, and a trumpet blown in obedience. A city fortified by fear, its walls thick as pride. A people trembling behind stone, and outside, an army that did not storm the gates, but circled them, one time, and again, and again, 7 days, and on the last, 7 times, until time itself seemed to hold its breath. This is the story of Joshua, but not the warrior you imagine, not the conqueror of legend. This Joshua walks slow, listens close, and leads a people through the impossible, not by force, but by faith. A story of waiting, of walking, of trusting the strange over the safe. Tonight, we'll walk beside him, step by step, round and round the walls that won't fall. Until they do dot, so close your eyes. Let the noise inside you fade, and enter the stillness where faith becomes sound, and sound becomes deliverance. Asterisk. The story of Joshua is not just a tale of conquest. It's the unfolding of a promise, a continuation, of a journey that began in the shadow of Egypt and wandered through wilderness and waiting. When Moses passed, the weight of leadership didn't fall on a throne. It fell on the shoulders of a servant, a man who had watched miracles with quiet eyes, who had carried hope across deserts, and now was called to lead a nation into the unknown. Ahead of him stood Jericho, a city closed shut, its walls tall, its gates sealed. Soldiers stood watch, but what God required wasn't siege engines or battle cries. It was patience, a walk of obedience, day after day, step after step, until the silence cracked open the sky. Before we begin tonight's journey, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? Whether it's late in the quiet hours of night, or early, before the world fully wakes, this is your moment, this space, to slow down, to let go, to simply listen. So wherever you are, whatever the hour, let's take this time together. Your breath deepen, let your body settle, and let this story walk beside you, softly, as walls begin to tremble in the dark. Moses was gone, the man who had split seas, faced Pharaoh, and spoken with God as a friend. The shepherd who had led them through plagues and deserts was now only a memory, a grave no one could find, resting somewhere beyond the Jordan. And in his place stood Joshua, not a prophet with a burning bush, not a man with tablets of stone, just Joshua, a servant, a warrior, a quiet witness to 40 years of wandering. The people looked to him now, hundreds of thousands, families, elders, children who had never known Egypt, only sand and sky. And behind them, a wilderness that had taught them hunger, patience, and trust. Before them, a river, full and fierce, and beyond it Canaan, the land of promise, the land of giants, the land of Jericho. Joshua stood alone at the edge of the camp. The wind moved through the tents. The sun cast long shadows, and in that silence, he wondered, was he ready? Could he follow where Moses had left off? That's when the voice came, not in thunder, not in fire, but in clarity that pierced the air like light. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, arise. Cross the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land I am giving them. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a call, a mantle being placed, a fire being transferred, ember by ember. Be strong and courageous, the voice said again and again. Do not be afraid. I will be with you wherever you go. Joshua didn't speak. He listened, and in that listening, something shifted. He gathered the officers, told them to prepare. In 3 days, they would move. No turning back. No more. Circling the desert. The promise waited on the other side of the river, But first he sent spies, 2 men chosen quietly, tasked with slipping into Jericho and watching, listening, measuring the walls, the people, the danger. They crossed the river under night's cover and entered the city at dusk. The gates of Jericho closed behind them, and from that moment they were ghosts. What they found was not what Joshua expected. Inside Jericho, fear had already bloomed. The stories had reached them of Egypt crushed, of seas parted, of desert fire. The people of Jericho trembled behind stone, afraid of a God they had never seen, but could not ignore Dot. And in the heart of that city, the spies found shelter in the house of Rahab, a woman whose name was whispered with shame, but whose heart burned with courage. I know the Lord has given you this land, she said. Everyone here is melting in fear. She hid the spies beneath flax on her roof, lied to the soldiers who came looking, risked everything for a faith she had only just begun to feel. When your God gives you this city, she asked, remember, spare my family. And they promised. A scarlet cord would be her sign, a thread of mercy in a house of stone. The spies returned, and their words brought no fear, only fire. The city is afraid, they said. Their hearts have melted. The Lord has gone before us. Joshua heard, and believed Dot not in the walls, not in the swords, but in the thread, and in the voice. People began to stir, to pack, to gather near the river Dot, and somewhere in the distance, Jericho waited Dot high, silent, closed, but its walls would not stand forever. Asterisk, the morning of the crossing came quiet. No trumpet, no lightning, only the steady rustle of cloth, the creak of leather straps, the soft murmur of families gathering by the edge of the Jordan. The river shimmered wide and restless, swollen from spring rains, its current fast and defiant. It was not a gentle stream, but a barrier, a line between wilderness and promise. Joshua rose before dawn. His eyes scanned the horizon, not in fear, but in readiness. Behind him, the camp stirred like a great living thing. Before him, the river waited like a test no man could pass alone. He called for the priests. They came, carrying the ark of the covenant wood and gold, sacred and heavy, with memory. Within it, the tablets of the law, the rod of Aaron, and manna from the wilderness. It was more than a relic. It was presence. The invisible throne of a God who walked with his people. You will lead, Joshua said. Step into the river, and stand still. No one questioned. The priests approached the edge. The water roared, the current pulled, and yet, without hesitation, they stepped in. And the moment their feet touched the water, the river paused far upstream. The current stopped, piled upon itself. The water rose into walls. The flow vanished, and before the eyes of thousands, the river became a path. The people stood stunned. Mothers gripped children. Elders wept. And, one by one, they stepped forward. Across dry ground, beneath open sky, the people of Israel walked into promise. The ark remained in the center of the crossing. The priests stood motionless, surrounded by silence where water once rushed. As if time itself had been held still, Joshua moved through the crowd, watching each tribe cross, the youngest to the oldest. He called for 12 men, one from each tribe, and instructed them to lift a stone from the riverbed. Carry it with you, he said. We will build a memorial. So when the last foot passed through and the ark came out of the river, the waters returned. The river rushed again, wild and undisturbed, as if it had never opened. But behind it, on the banks of Canaan, stood a nation changed. 12 stones were placed in a circle, heavy, weathered, sacred, and around them the camp settled for the night. Fires flickered. Children slept. Hearts whispered with awe. Joshua stood alone beside the stones. He didn't smile. He didn't boast. He simply looked toward Jericho, still distant, still silent, but no longer unreachable. Behind him was wilderness. Before him was war. But within him was peace, because the river had opened, because the voice still spoke, and because obedience had become the key to the impossible. That night, beneath stars older than fear, a nation rested in promise, not because they had arrived, but because they had begun. And in the hush between the river and the walls, faith took root. In soil long, denied, the city loomed a headstone upon stone, thick walls carved by time and fear. Jericho was not just fortified, it was confident. No army had ever breached it. From its high towers, watchmen peered into the distance. And what they saw must have puzzled them. No ladders, no catapults, no calls to arms. Only people walking. Joshua stood at the front, not with a sword, but with silence. The instructions had been clear. The people were to march around the city once a day for 6 days. No talking, no shouting, just walking. Only the priests were to make a sound, blowing long, solemn notes from 7 rounds horns as they carried the ark ahead of the crowd. So they walked. One long circle, step after step. The horns echoed, and the people behind them said nothing. Inside the walls, Jericho held its breath. Soldiers tightened their grips on spears. Children clung to mothers. No stones were thrown. Number. Gates opened. Just eyes watching. Waiting. Outside. The circle completed. The people returned to camp. No wall fell. No thunder split the sky. Just silence. And again, the next day. And the next. The tension grew thicker. Doubts whispered in the minds of many. Is this it? Is this the plan? But no one broke formation. No one challenged the command. The priests lifted the horns again, and the feet returned to the dust. What do you do when God tells you to move, but nothing seems to change? You keep moving, because the obedience itself becomes the battle. And each circle carved a rhythm around the city, through the heart, into the soul. A rhythm of trust, a rhythm of surrender. By the 4th day, the people of Jericho had stopped mocking. Their taunts faded into fear, because nothing is more terrifying than an enemy who doesn't flinch. Joshua remained still, his eyes fixed, his ears tuned not to the people, but to the voice, the same voice that once said, "Cross the Jordan," now said, "Wait." And so they waited. Walking, on the 6th day, the sun burned hotter. The horns sounded heavier. Dust clung to sandals and robes, but still they walked. No cracks on the wall, no whispers from heaven, only footsteps and faith. That night, the camp grew quiet. The fires burned low, and the people knew tomorrow would be different. Because on the 7th day, they would walk not once but 7 times, 7 laps, 7 trumpets. And then a shout, not a battle cry, not a scream of desperation, a holy shout, the sound of obedience unleashed, the voice of a people who believed not in their might, but in the word. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, they lay beneath the stars, hearts beating slow, lungs full of dust and hope. And somewhere in the shadows of Jericho, Rahab tied a scarlet cord to her window, a thread of salvation, waiting for its moment. Asterisk, the 7th day rose quiet and golden. The sun climbed slow, casting long beams across the tents, as if the heavens themselves leaned in to watch. This day would not be like the others. The people knew. Joshua knew. Even the wind seemed to move differently, soft, alert, expectant. The command was clear. Today, they would march 7 times around the city. Not 1 circle and rest, but 7. And when the final round was complete, the trumpets would blast. and every voice would rise, but not yet. Not on the first lap, not on the second, not even on the sixth. Only silence, and footsteps, and horns that cried like slow thunder through the morning air. The ark moved ahead, glinting in the sun, carried by steady hands. The priests blew their ram's horns with breath, both sacred and strained. The people followed, their robes brushing dust, sandals falling in rhythm. Around the wall they moved. Inside Jericho, hearts pounded. Soldiers gripped weapons with sweating hands. Children whimpered in corners. The people had seen many things. Before armies, sieges, battles. But this was different. The quiet carved into their minds, like blades. By the third lap, fatigue set in. By the fifth, the city seemed larger. The walls taller, the march longer, but no one stopped. No one questioned. And on the seventh circle, something shifted. The people weren't walking in silence anymore. They were walking in memory. Every footstep recalled the manna that never failed. Every breath remembered the Red Sea splitting wide. Every glance at the ark reminded them of the covenant that carried them this far. Joshua raised his hand. The priests knew the signal. And when the final lap was done, when the circle closed and the people stood once more before the walls of Jericho, he gave the word, "Shout." And they did. A sound not born of battle or fear, but of obedience. The trumpets blared long, sharp, and loud enough to pierce stone. And the people's voices followed, rising like a wave, like a storm, like a release. Not a single sword had been raised. Not a single ladder leaned against stone, but the walls, cracked. At first, a tremble beneath the feet, and a groan in the earth. And then the unthinkable stone screamed. Dust exploded into sky. Jericho's walls, thick as fear and heavy, as pride, collapsed inward, not chipped, not breached, but broken completely, as if heaven itself had breathed. And they fell. The people stood stunned, and then they ran, not in chaos, but in clarity. Rahab's house stood untouched. Her scarlet cord hung bright in the window, a ribbon of mercy in the ruins. Joshua had not forgotten. The promise was kept. Her family was saved, and the rest of Jericho was no more. The city that could not fall fell without siege, without blood at the gate, because of trust, because of patience, because of a shout born from silence. When the dust cleared, Joshua looked upon the rubble, not with pride, but with awe, not at what they had done, but at what had been done through them. They burned the city, but took nothing for themselves. It was sacred, a firstfruit offering to the God who had delivered victory in his own way, by his own power. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, the people rested. No enemies remained, no walls loomed, only memory, and the rhythm of faith fulfilled. For the first time since Egypt, the land beneath their feet felt like home. Amid the smoke and stone of a fallen Jericho, one house still stood, its walls cracked but unbroken, its windows open to the sun, and from one window fluttered a single scarlet cord, a thread against the ruin, a ribbon against the dust. Inside, Rahab held her breath. Around her, her family, brothers, sisters, parents, all still and silent. They had heard the walls fall, felt the earth shake. The ground beneath them had cried like thunder, but this room had not moved. Not one stone had shifted, not one beam had fallen, because faith had sealed it. Faith and a promise. Rahab had not grown up knowing this God. She had lived in shadows, in alleys, in the broken places of Jericho. Her name was known, but never spoken with kindness. To the men of the city, she was a convenience. To the women, a warning. But to heaven, she was seen. When the spies entered her doorway, She recognized something they did not carry with their hands, but with their presence. They did not fear. They did not boast. They listened. And she believed, not in them, but in the God who sent them. "I know your God has given you this land," she had said. "We have heard what he has done, and our hearts melt." And so she asked not for escape, but for mercy. "Spare my family. Remember me." And they had nodded, quietly. "Leave the scarlet cord hanging from your window. When the walls fall, you will remain." And now, it had come to pass. Rahab stepped outside. The sky above her was the same, but the city around her had changed forever. Joshua stood among the rubble. When he saw the house still standing, his heart stirred. He remembered the promise, and he sent for Rahab. She walked through the ruins slowly, barefoot, her family behind her. Ash clung to her robe, but her eyes held peace. She bowed low before Joshua, and he spoke gently. "You are remembered, and you are safe." No one cheered. No trumpet sounded. But in that moment, another wall fell not of stone, but of shame, and Rahab stepped across it. She joined the people of Israel, not as a captive, not as a stranger, but as one of them. She lived among them, learned their ways, worshiped their God, and in time, she became part of something greater than any city. Rahab married, and from her womb came a child, and from that child, another, and generations later, from her line would come a man named Jesus. The scarlet thread did not end in Jericho. It stretched forward through kings and prophets until it wove into the fabric of redemption itself. A woman once called unclean became part of the holy, not because of what she had done, but because of who she trusted that the people never forgot. Her name was spoken differently, now whispered in reverence, told in stories beside the fire, remembered in the scrolls. Her faith had saved her. Her courage had opened a door where none seemed possible. And that scarlet thread? It was more than fabric. It was a sign that mercy finds its way into any house that makes space for God. Tonight, as the fires in the camp die low and the stars gather above the resting people, one figure remains awake a little longer. Rahab sits quietly near her tent, listening to the wind, her fingers brushing the red thread still tied around her wrist dot. It is frayed now, but strong, faded, but still red, just like her story. Proof that even in the ruins of what was, something holy can begin. Asterisk, the dust of Jericho settled slowly. Where once there stood stone walls and bronze gates, there was now only open land strewn with rubble and the ashes of fear. The people of Israel did not dance. They did not chant songs of triumph. Instead, they moved with quiet awe, as if still unsure whether they had witnessed a miracle. O walked straight through one. The ark rested beneath a makeshift canopy. The trumpets were silent, and the people gathered not to celebrate, but to remember. Joshua stood in the center of the camp, eyes closed, face lifted toward the sky. Said no words. He simply breathed, as if trying to capture the weight of what had just happened. Victory had come, but not by might. It had come through trust, through ritual, through a silence deeper than any sword's roar. The people knew. Now, this land was not theirs by conquest. It was theirs by covenant. And every step forward would be taken not with pride, but with humility. That night, a memorial was built near the camp. Not another pile of stones like the ones from the Jordan, but a circle of ash and charred wood symbol of what had fallen and what had been preserved. Elders sat beside the fire, telling the young ones of Egypt, of the Red Sea, of manna and serpents, and now of walls that crumbled at the sound of faith. Some children listened with wide eyes. Others drifted to sleep. in the arms of their mothers, and the stories wrapped around them like blankets. Far from the center of the camp, Rahab tended to her family. She had been given a tent among the tribe of Judah, and though her past clung faintly to her skin, her future began to bloom with every act of kindness she received. Each time she saw a child glance at the scarlet thread on her wrist, she smiled softly, humbly, as if even she could barely believe her story. Joshua spent most of the night awake. He walked the camp slowly, his sandals brushing quiet dirt. He listened not for voices, but for echoes. Echoes of footsteps circling stone. Echoes of trumpets in still air. Echoes of a shout not of rage, but of obedience. And in that stillness, he wondered, would the people remember? Would they hold to silence, to patience, to the strange sacred paths that God often chose? Or would they soon return to old ways, leaning on strength instead of trust, on strategy instead of surrender? But tonight, the fire still burned. The stars still watched. The land beneath them still held the scent of promise. At the edge of the camp, one of the priests quietly polished the horn he had blown. He ran his fingers along the curve, pausing at the mouthpiece. It had not called for war. It had called for obedience. And somehow, that had been enough. As dawn began to stretch its fingers across the sky, the people stirred slowly. No command had been given. No battle awaited them. Just another step forward. But something had changed in them. They had seen walls fall with no hand raised. They had watched fear melt without drawing a blade. They had followed a God who marched them in circles, only to prove he was never out of control. That morning, no one spoke of Jericho. They spoke of Rahab. They spoke of Joshua. They spoke of the shout. But most of all, they spoke of faith, not the kind that moves quickly, but the kind that walks, that waits, that obeys. Even when the reason is unclear. The journey wasn't over. More cities would come. More giants would rise. But something had been planted in their hearts, an anchor, invisible but immovable. And in that camp, under that sky, with the sound of wind passing over the ruins behind them, a nation rested, not in what they had done, but in who they were becoming, a people of the promise. And now, the journey rests. The walls have fallen. The silence has spoken. And the people of Israel walk forward into a land not claimed by force, but received by faith. Joshua's footsteps fade into memory, but the echo of obedience still lingers. A trumpet blown in stillness, a shout released in trust, and a scarlet thread waving gently in the wind. Sometimes the battles we face are not meant to be fought, but waited on. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is to be still when everything inside us wants to move. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath grows slow, let this story walk with you into rest. Let it remind you that even when the path makes no sense, even when you're circling the same wall again and again, there is a promise ahead and a presence walking beside you. You don't have to fight tonight. You don't have to understand. You only need to rest. The story continues now, but only in sound. Let the fire crackle. Let the night wrap around you. And may peace, soft as the whisper of falling walls, lead you into sleep.